Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gilroy, California real estate market analysis for January of 2023. This is a time when we can look back, take a look at what's been going on in the real estate market, also get an idea of where we are right now, and hopefully after reviewing some of that past information, get some insights into where the market might be going. So let's go ahead and jump in. But before we do, I'm Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker and realtor right here in Southern Silicon Valley, serving the South County area. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to find out more about finding the perfect home or getting an estimate of the current value of your home. Just head on over to soldbyrobert.com for that. All that information is right there on the front page. I don't hide it, so feel free to jump in. There you can also check out my weekly podcast, Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker, and you can also check out our monthly coffee and real estate live chat, which really does sort of a nice overview, takes questions from folks who show up, that kind of stuff. We'll make sure to check that out as we have those coming up on the third Saturday of every month. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. As always, we start with total active listings. And for the month of January of 2023 in Gilroy, we had 55 homes on the market. Comparing that to the same time last year, we had 36 homes on the market in January of 2022. That's a 53% increase in the total number of homes on the market. And of course, to kind of calibrate yourself to what that number means, for buyers, this is the number of homes you had to choose from during the month of January. And for you sellers out there, these are the number of homes you had to compete with for the attention of the buyers that were out there. Now, in terms of projections, where do we think things will go as we move further into 2023? If we look back at January of 2022, we can see that January and February were relatively flat. Given the small sample size of activity that happens in Gilroy, that really is kind of a wash. But we do see a trend where the number of homes on the market tends to go up once we hit March. And last year, that peaked July of 2022. My guess is we'll see the same trend here. We may see, again, a relatively flat level of performance or even a bit of a decline in the number of homes listed in February of 2023. But I think that we will see this number increase a bit, but perhaps not as dramatically as we've seen in past months. Given the influences of the market, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we did see continued increases that are large. But I feel like the market's starting to flatten a bit here. Things are starting to sort of play out. We're also at a point where we're starting to see some beneficial interest rates. So the total number of active listings may actually retain its flatness in the coming months. But of course, we'll see how that plays out. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at new listings, and these are homes that are added to the market in the month of January, we had 52 homes listed in January of 2022, and we had 39 homes listed in January of 2023. That's a 25% decline from the same time last year. Now, what's interesting is if we take a look at what the total number of homes, the months of inventory number is, it still remains relatively low. If we look at the inventory numbers versus the sold numbers, and that's something we can check out here in a moment, we'll see that despite the fact that it is definitely moving towards a buyer's marketplace where buyers are not paying as much as they were a year ago, and sellers are really having to go out and sort of court buyers, with just the smallest turnaround, that could change because we only have a handful of months worth of inventory. We are nowhere near the point where you would tend, if you're just looking at inventory numbers or months of inventory, we're not really looking at a scenario that tends to define a buyer's market, but that is absolutely where we are, which just goes to show you there is no single number that is going to define what a market is like. So the months of inventory is one that we can look at and see that if you just looked at that, you'd still assume it's a seller's market, but that really isn't where we are right now. If we try to predict a little bit of the future here, we can see that in January of last year, we had relatively flat performance between January and February, with the exact same number of new listings between January and February in Gilroy of last year, 52 homes. But then a pretty big jump as the typical market starts. If you're going to list your home, you're going to do it in that time period just before summer so that you can take advantage of the fact that you've got better weather. And if you have children, you're able to handle movement from one school to another, that type of thing. And in May of 2022, we peaked at 95 homes listed. Keep in mind also that activity back in January, February, March was relatively higher because we didn't have those crazy interest rates that we've been dealing with since then. Let's take a look at the total number of homes sold. we can see that last year we sold 27 homes in January of 2022. In January of 2023, that number dropped to 19, which is the same number we had in December. So that's a 30% drop from the same time last year. And if we look back at last year, we can see we really bottomed out in terms of number of homes sold in January of 2022. But what's interesting is leading up to January of 2022, we simply don't have the elevated homes sold numbers that we had last year. Relatively flat, as I said. December was the exact same number as January last year. And we came down from a November high of 54, which then dramatically dropped down to January. And again, the primary reason for this difference that we're seeing in terms of performance over time is that the market dramatically changed in March of last year with the increase of interest rates. And you can see that we peaked in terms of total number of homes sold in April last year. That does tend to make sense because remember, those interest rates started to go up in March and folks locked in those rates in March, which resulted in sales in April. So that's why we tended to see the sales numbers kind of peak there and then drop dramatically after that. Now, we do also tend to normally see a drop off after April, May, June, but I think we saw a drop off a little sooner than usual last year, and primarily because of those interest rate hikes. Next, pending homes. Now, we've just started to add tracking pending data, and this basically tells us how many homes went pending or contingent, which means accepted an offer in that month. And we can see that last year, the number was 35 homes accepted an offer in January of 2022. In January of 2023, that number dropped off to 23. That's a 34% drop. And this is an interesting one to sort of anticipate what's going to happen in the following month, right? Now, remember, we talked about a peak of total homes sold in April of 2022 last year. And so we logically see in March of 2022 a peak of pending homes because offers were accepted, and typically you tend to see those accepted offers closing in the next month. Not always. Sometimes it's the month after that because escrows can range anywhere from 30 to 45 days or longer, depending on the scenario, or less if it's an all-cash purchase, that kind of thing. But if we're trying to extract any trends that we might expect, if we look at January and then look back a little bit, we can see that in January of last year, we actually saw more homes pending in January than in December, and we don't see that this year. And in November of last year, we had much higher than November of this year. So I'm not really sure where we expect things to go here. I would expect some level of increase in pending offers between now and February and March, perhaps not at the dramatic levels we saw last year, simply because, remember, the market was much more robust at the first part of 2022 because interest rates hadn't gone up yet. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our average original list price. And remember, original list price is what the home was actually listed for the day it went on the market. And the reason why I report that number is because I want to get an idea of where sellers' heads were at. How much did they think their homes should sell for, particularly when we're thinking about compared to the same time last year. Now, Gilroy historically has tended to be one of the more sane communities where they adapted to the new reality of what homes are selling for quicker than other areas. So this time around in January of 2023, we're seeing that sellers are expecting to get 2.3% more for their home than they did at the same time last year on average. That gives us $1,238,428 as the average original list price for homes in January, compared to last year's $1,210,550. So not a huge difference here, and given the small sample size of Gilroy, that's really almost a wash in terms of just margin of error calculations. But now let's take a look at where we're calibrated for actual sales prices. If we look at this number, we can see that despite the fact the average hoped for sales price is only about 2% higher than last year, but again, we can pretty much call that equivalent with last year. In January of 2023, the actual average sales price was down 20%. That is at $985,360. The January 22nd average sales price was $1,228,325. If we're trying to extract any trends that we're going to see here, the overall trend really since August of 2022 has been downward. The month-to-month numbers tend to fluctuate because a single high-priced or low-priced home, because of the small sample size, can tend to nudge these one way or the other. So as we look at this, try not to just sort of fasten yourself to the exact number that's shown, but try to extract a trend here. And I think overall you can see that the trend is downward. It's really hard to call it any other direction. Next, let's go ahead and look at percent of list price. If you take a look at what the home was listed for at the time the offer was accepted, that's what we're talking about list price. Now, just like we were trying to look inside the heads of sellers with the original home asking price, this looks inside the brain of buyers in terms of what they were willing to offer for the property at the time it was listed. So when faced with a certain listing price, on average in January of 2023, buyers were getting into contract for 99.3% of asking price, which is less than 1% below asking, which is actually pretty good. But I think that that's more a reflection of the more reasonable or market-aware pricing that we're seeing in Gilroy than we're seeing in other communities that are tending to see this number being quite a bit lower. In other words, we're seeing most other areas seeing 2, 3, 4% below asking price, whereas we're seeing it closer in Gilroy, because I think in general, Gilroy is pricing themselves more correctly right now. Last year, this number was 106.6%, which means the average home sold for 6.6% over asking price, which reflects an entirely different market. That would indicate multiple offers, that type of thing. And we're just not seeing that anymore in today's market. The overall delta here is 7.3%. So in terms of list price, in terms of what folks were paying a year ago versus what folks are paying today, it is overall 7.3% lower than what it was last year. What are we seeing in trends? It's really not hard to spot this one. Since March and April of last year, we've been seeing a relatively steady downturn. It's not going to surprise me if we see this continuing. I would expect to continue to see under 100% performance in the coming months. And of course, as we move through the year, we'll see how these end up landing. Days on market. This is another one where the trend is difficult to miss. Last year we had 10 days was the average days on market, which is even back then, even though that's a short amount of time, that was an artificial number. That was real estate agents saying we're not going to consider any offers till X number of days after the home was listed. Today, that number is 32 days. And as I've said before, I think a month is sort of a magic number for sellers. Once sellers sort of grapple with the idea that their home hasn't sold in an entire month, that's when they start thinking about potentially reducing their prices. This is up 220% from the same time last year. And I'm going to strongly suggest that if you're trying to get your home sold, you need to have a conversation with your real estate agent about correctly pricing your home right now. You do not want to play the game where you tell yourself, well, we can always reduce the price, because the bottom line is if you wait, you will end up reducing your price more in a month than you would today. Today, you're going to get a better price than you will in a month, most likely, given the data that we're seeing right now. Next, price reductions. These are the number of homes that have, or the percentage of homes on the market that have had a price reduction. And right now it's 31.4%. Last year at the same time, it was 34.2%. And this is just a reflection of sellers having to respond to overpricing their home. Now, since Gilroy is tending to price things a little bit more intelligently for the market, I would expect to see this number drop. I actually said the same thing last month about Gilroy, and we did see it drop from 34.2 to 31.4. But as homes come on the market that are overpriced, eventually these folks are going to have to reduce their prices. And as I said before, the longer they wait, the more they're going to have to reduce that price, or the less they're going to have to take from buyers out there in the marketplace. Okay, I hope that has been valuable information for everyone. Of course, you can always find me at my website, soldbyrobert.com. I'm always ready to help you with any of your real estate needs, whether you're buying, selling, or investing. So head on over to soldbyrobert.com, and I'll be happy to let you have access to any of the tools on the site that might help you reach your goals. And of course, you can also reach out to me directly right there. All right, thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.